My guest today is Vienna Pharaon. Hi, Vienna. I actually never
Hi.
checked how to pronounce your name because I thought these are two familiar words. I should be able to manage. I realized that maybe the family name is a little tricky.
You did well. You did well. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi,
So
Vienna.
nice to be here.
Yes,
Hi.
it's nice to have you. So I'll do the last bit of official thing and then we'll have the conversation. So the last bit of official thing is the bio. So my guest today, Vienna, is a licensed marriage and family therapist based in New York City and is the founder of Mindful Marriage and Family Therapy. She works with individuals, couples, and families within the context of relationships and focuses on the systems in which people are brought up and exist in today. Vienna leads retreats around the world and is an international presenter. She believes that we all have the capacity for beautiful change and fulfilling relationships and has a way of leading people back home, connecting deeply to their needs and helping people connect to their voice in order to create the change they wish to see in themselves and their lives. She's the founder, the founding expert on minds. I probably have to verify what it means exactly, and has been featured in The Economist, Fatherly, Netflix, and Vogue, to name a few. With over 600,000 followers on her Instagram account, Mindful MFT, Vienna is recognized as one of the great relationship influencers of our time. And on my personal experience, definitely do follow Vienna on Instagram. It's full of wonderful wisdom and the things which I believe, you know, when they pop up, I'm sure people comment to your post like, it's exactly what I needed to hear right now.
Absolutely right. And that's the beauty of the human experience. But thank you for that beautiful introduction. Hi, everyone. So nice to be here with you all. I know we shifted our conversation from navigating family during the holidays to talking about breaking patterns, unwanted patterns in our lives. But yeah, it's all very interconnected. So where to begin? Do you have a place? Do you have a place we want to start?
You know, I do want to start actually with the book, mostly because it's something very dear to my heart as well. I'm in the process of publishing my book right now. So I wanted to ask you, your book is called I think On the Origins of You, right, or something?
The Origins of You, yeah.
The Origins of You. What does that exactly mean? The Origins of You? Is it the origin? The biological, the emotional, the philosophical origins of you. I'm just really curious. Is it the book about coming back to you?
Yeah. So I named this book, The Origins of You, because my work, as you already mentioned, I work with individuals, couples, and families. I've worked with clients for over 20,000 hours of direct therapeutic time with people. And what I've learned both personally and professionally is that the unwanted patterns that we have in our lives that we can't shake, right? Where we try to make a behavioral change, but it doesn't stick, right? It doesn't shift something, requires us to look back at the unresolved pain in our lives. And I spend a lot of my time and focus in understanding the family systems that we grew up in. And understanding the wounds that we accrue during that time. And why I said the origins of you, when I use that word origins, right, what it means to me is the first time something significant happens in our lives and sets the foundation and framework for the trajectory. And unfortunately, we're talking about the negative things, right? We have beautiful origins and we also have experiences that are very wounding for us. In the book, I talk about 5 origin wounds, which I am sure will resonate with a lot of people here, right? The worthiness wound, the belonging wound, prioritization wound, trust wound, and safety wound. And what I have found is that when we have activation in our current lives, there's something very profound and powerful about understanding, like, what's familiar about this, right? When is the first time in which I experienced this sensation of not feeling good enough, of not feeling deserving, of not feeling important enough, feeling like I'm othered or on the outside, or I'm not a part of something? When I don't feel like I can trust or I'm safe in this world, right? And like, those are the things that we're having to tend to. It's hard sometimes to go back into our family system, right? People are like, no, that was decades ago. I don't want to go there. Like, can we just stay focused on what's happening right now? And we can try, but what I find is that eventually, right? We're coming back into this space to address the pain that we sometimes try to white knuckle our way through, right? The pain that still exists and wants attention and wants acknowledgement and wants relief. But because we're just trying to brute force our way through life, right? It's like it doesn't actually get the tending to that we need. And so this book is a journey about going back to the firsts. And yeah, I hope that it feels like a very held space. A lot of people are like, I don't want to go there because I'm going to open Pandora's box. I like I've gotten my relationship with my family members to a certain point and I don't want to disrupt it.
Equilibrium.
Maybe, right. Or maybe we have a deceased parent and we don't want to shift how we feel. And I think a lot of times people have the narrative that our parents did the best that they could with what they had, and that all of those things can be valid. And also it tends to be a distraction away from healing, right? It erases honoring what our pain actually is. And yeah, that's the invitation here to go back there, to not stay there. We're not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but we do need to name and acknowledge our pain and really witness it, to start working with it, to move it.
So I'm not a very serious person. Those who know me, even if I might sometimes make a serious face, I've heard this somewhat joking comment, I don't even remember where, but long time ago, that raise your kids all you want. All their traumas are still going to be due to you. How true is that? That our loving parents, no matter how much we love the kids, we are the source origin of a lot of the trauma that they later have to sort out with therapists.
Right. Yeah. I get so many parents who ask, like, what can I do to not screw up my children? And my answer every single time is to just commit to continuing to resolve that which is unresolved, right? Just continue to commit to healing the pain that exists, because that's what happens, right? Like, of course, we're never going to create a perfect environment for children. As much as we want, we do not exist in a vacuum. And so we know, right, that they're going to have experiences and we are going to let them down. And we're going to say the wrong things sometimes, and we are going to be imperfect. And obviously we want to try to protect them from the big stuff, right? But they can't exist in a perfect environment because that's going to rob a lot from them. And honestly, existing in a perfect, quote unquote, environment also creates wounding for people too, right? And so, yes, there's something about accepting that, yeah, it's going to be imperfect and there could be trauma or wounds or pain past. But when we do this work, we shift it. Right? We don't have to pass it down. And even if it's late, right? So a lot of times parents are like, uh-oh, I see that I haven't been prioritizing my child, or I look back 20 years later and I feel a lot of shame for how I behaved. And what I work with adults who were once children, right? And these adults will always say, like, if a parent can acknowledge something, even when it's 30 years later, there's something so beautiful and healing about that. And so, yeah, to your point, yes, we will screw them up. Yes, there will be pain that we cause. Yes, we won't get it right all of the time. But one of the greatest gifts is our ability to take ownership and accountability, to speak that out to our children, whether they're tiny or they're grown adults. And this is, when I talk about self-love, it's about remembering that we are humans, right? So it requires grace and compassion for the self, for the human experience, but it also intersects with ownership and accountability, which means, okay, I'm human and I do make mistakes and I got this wrong. And I also need to take ownership and hold myself accountable for the misstep, right? Because one without the other doesn't work. If you're constantly excusing your behavior because I'm human and humans can do this, right? Or if you're constantly too hard and shaming yourself and criticizing yourself, right? Like, there's no way forward. And so that's the intersection for me of self-love, is grace and compassion, accountability and ownership, and bringing that forward. And I really recommend that for anyone, especially parents, when they're navigating some of this with their children.
Now, Vienna, coming back to what you were saying, you said that creating perfect environment can also cause, is very often a source of trauma as well. And I want to stop here for a short moment and maybe dig a little deeper in the explanation why, and why I'm asking that question is that I think 21st century is a little bit obsessed with perfectionism in a sense. I'm not sure about the end of 20th century, but I don't think people have been so crazy about doing things right, especially those who are interested in personal growth and transformation. Having been in this industry for 20 years, I can see that we are so we so want to make it perfect and to make it right. I even heard people saying, I'm afraid of having children and I won't have children until I know that I can do it perfectly. So can you explain how this perfect environment might become a source of trauma?
Yeah, right. I say for children, right, how we learn is through experience and through observation, right? So if you're watching parents try to uphold this notion of perfection, energetically, we're going to see and feel something, right? But then the expectation of perfection of a child. So this really speaks to the worthiness wound, which is the first wound that I talk about in the book. And when I say worthiness wound, what I mean is that, the experience of growing up in a family system where you felt like you needed to perform, please, perfect, be the comic relief, be the quiet one, whatever it is, but there was a condition. So be this, and it usually showed like there's something performative about it. Be this way, or so that you can get connection, love, attention, validation, attachment, right? And if you're not perfect, right? If you're not bringing home the straight A's, or if you're not scoring a hat trick on, the field or whatever it might be, right? Then we lose connection to love and presence and validation and attention, right? And so a lot of times perfectionists will absolutely have a worthiness wound, right? Where they learn that it is dependent on this thing. Right. And so again, through observation, if the emphasis is on you have to present perfectly and you have to appear and have your hair a certain way or dress a certain way or this or that in order to be validated and approved of, right? Like that leaves us with the notion that we must be this way in order to be loved and validated. And so a lot of this work, again, is identifying the origin of where this all births, because it's very easy for, if you were a perfectionist as a child, to keep that role going as an adult later on too, and believing that we need to be perfect in order to be chosen, in order to be loved, in order to have people care about us. And if we aren't, if there's no space for imperfection, flaws, etc., right, then love is lost. Right. And so we can start to see how much the condition of love and the relationship, it really sets the tone here for, little kiddos growing up in a system like that.
I want to dig deep a little bit with the idea of worthiness, and maybe it's not a very fair question, but in your experience, since you've worked with a lot of people, how worthy do you think contemporary society, well, I'm generalizing, of course, but how much of a problem is this feeling that I'm not worthy?
Huge. I created a quiz that was, what is your origin wound? And there's been over 25,000 people who have taken the quiz now. And 80% of them come back with a primary worthiness origin wound. That doesn't mean that we don't have multiples, right? I have a worthiness wound and a safety wound. And some people who have, the book just came out yesterday, but people who had advanced copies of it were like, is it possible to have all five? And so we know that there can be multiples. But when I started writing the book and putting the wounds together, I even say it in the chapter, I say, I'm actually convinced that every single one of us rubs up against a worthiness wound at some point or another. Am I good enough? Am I deserving of this? Am I valuable, right? Like the condition, if I am not presenting this, or this way, who will see me, validate me, love me, choose me, connect with me, be present with me, right? And there is so much pressure to perform and achieve and show up in the world. And it really moves us out of authenticity, right? It requires us to, exist in an inauthentic way. My worthiness wound There's a lot to the story. My parents started their divorce process when I was in first grade, and it was a 9-year divorce process. It was the longest at the time in the state of New Jersey, and there was so much chaos and conflict. It was really high conflict. There was a lot of psychological abuse, manipulation, gaslighting, paranoia. And what I saw were my two parents crashing and burning, and it was very dysfunctional. And as a tiny human in that system, I was like, I can't add any more to this. And so I decided to fly under the radar, pretend like everything was fine. I was unaffected by all of the things. That's how I presented. My perspective was that if I was not fine, right, if I was affected by things, that would be too much for them because they were struggling so much, right? And so I became this needless little girl who pretended like she was fine and unaffected all of the time, who then turned into a needless woman, unsurprisingly, who couldn't set boundaries, said that she was totally fine with things, unaffected by things, really played the cool girl persona. And that piece is important because there's an additional component to this. My father was there when I was easygoing, when I presented the way that he wanted me to, love, connection, support, acts of service as a love language from him. But when I was quote unquote difficult as a teenager or a young 20-year-old, he would punish by giving me the silent treatment for sometimes days or weeks on end. And what that contributed to was this notion that when you're easygoing, when you don't have needs, when you kind of stay in your box, in your lane, then you get love, connection, presence, validation, etc. But when you express your needs, or you disagree, or you are not presenting the way that somebody quote unquote wants you to, then love is taken. You are punished. And that really merged with that role that I had taken on as a little girl, right? Where it was like, okay, be needless. You're unaffected. Everything's fine. Present in this way so that you can protect the system. And then also, if you're not presenting that way, then you get punished in this way, right? And so that was the condition that I learned. That was like my worthiness is attached to me being easygoing, never expressing a need, never sharing when I don't like something because it wasn't tolerated. Right. And so that's, everybody obviously has a different story, and we don't fit into boxes. But I think part of the exploration here is to understand how these experiences get internalized, and then what they kind of carve out within us that continues to run the show. Right. And how that was, let me tie it to adult life just for the listeners here. I also see that somebody else lived in New Jersey and it took their parents 9 years to divorce as well. My bedroom was in between theirs. Oh yeah. Sounds exciting. So we could probably relate here quite a bit. So when I was dating my now husband, in the early parts, I remember we had gotten into a conflict, and I can't tell you what the conflict was about. I have no idea. But what I do remember is that I was so committed to proving my point and being right. And at one point, he's like, okay, I got it. And I kept going. I was doubling down. I was tripling down. I couldn't stop going. And I almost had this out of body experience where I was just like watching myself just go and go and go. And was like, oh my gosh, like I can't even stop. And this out of body was like, please stop talking, Vienna, make it end. This is not becoming of you. And if I'm being really honest, I was really scared. I had a lot of shame around that part coming forward. And I worried that it would end a relationship, right, if I continued behaving that way. When I got curious of like, what's the origin of needing to be right? Like why is that so important to me? Because here's an important inquiry for all of us. The behaviors that we don't like, that we do, that we engage in, they're serving something, right? They're protecting us. They're attempting to protect us from something. And when I asked myself that question, what it brought me back to was, and I shared with you before, that I grew up with a lot of psychological abuse around, not towards me, but towards my mom, and a lot of gaslighting. And being right was equated to safety for me, because I saw how psychological abuse and manipulation and gaslighting caused crazy making, right? It was like, I'm not safe anymore. I'm emotionally unsafe and dysregulated. That's what I saw in my mom. And so as a little girl, I started tracking my dad's words very, very closely so that I would never miss a beat. So even if you change something up slightly or this or that, like I was following always. And so being right meant I was safe. Right. That's why I needed to be this point prover, this person who followed every single detail and could tell you everything that we just said. And nope, that was wrong, because that was my unresolved pain from the past showing up, trying to protect me. But what has to happen is that we have to shift into a mature, adult, wise space where, yeah, if these unresolved wounds are still running the show, they can be very destructive to our lives, right? Because somebody probably doesn't want to stay with you as a partner if you keep behaving that way over and over again, right? Or like a conflict that you keep having, right? It's like, this is where we need to turn. And so, yeah, that's just a current, as opposed to just like what happened in my childhood, right? It's like, you see how it starts to play out in my adult life and relationships.
So I have a almost question and then a real question. So almost question, almost question is, did your experience of childhood actually, was it the reason why you went into psychology and becoming a therapist?
100%. And like it's so funny because therapists, whether they know it or not, it's like we go into this field to try to resolve our pain, right? Yeah. It's like, and I think the main thing from a pretty unevolved place at the time was, I do not want their relationship. I cannot go through what they went through. And because our family systems are the first education that we get about everything, conflict, communication, love, relationships, et cetera, right? It's like, I didn't have a great education, right? I saw really harmful things and I experienced very harmful things. And there was a part of me that's like, I need to protect myself from this. And so I got an education in how to have healthy relationships. But what it gave me was so much more than what I even thought that I was entering into, right? It's like, it was the catalyst for all of my healing work. And, it's beautiful, beautiful work. And I'm so grateful that I got to be educated in this space. But then beyond it, it's just my own love for this field and, helping walk alongside other people who are trying to resolve their pain too. But absolutely, it was generated from growing up in this family system and just seeing the breakdown. I was so curious, like, why do some relationships work and some don't? It was like, why are some functional and okay and others are not? That was very interesting to me. And I wanted to see what went into having healthy, long-lasting relationships.
Mm-hmm. So another half question, because I have a proper question which I have to ask, and I'll get there to the proper question. But another half question was inspired by your answer to my previous half question. So you said that you didn't get a proper education in relationships in your family environment. And that immediately brought to my mind, at least, this idea that, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. As a person who works with wounds, how much can we rely on the idea that, if you've survived, then you're going to be better? Or do you actually have to put a little more into
yeah, I think
after not being killed?
Right. Yeah. I think we have to put a little more elbow grease into it, honestly. I think that's a saying that we've heard for so long that somehow finds a way to like shift what happened so it wasn't so bad because, hey, look, you're still here and you survived. And, we know that our wounds and our gifts are next door neighbors. One of my colleagues and former professors says that, which I think is right. Most people are like, well, if that happened, I wouldn't be who I am today. Or it's like, well, that developed this very important muscle of mine. And that I really appreciate that this is what I'm good at now. And I know that, I am a great therapist because I went through many of the experiences that I did. I track information very well. I don't miss a beat. I remember everything. It's really good for the position that I have. But there is a point where our gift no longer is motivated by the pain. right? That the gift is motivated by the healing. A lot of times people are really scared that they'll lose their edge if they heal, if they like go back in there. I work with some athletes,
like
and that's always,
and artists as well.
Of course, right? And so, no, it's not, I don't love that notion of, well, you survived it, it makes you stronger, and now just go be strong, right? It's like our pain there's a part in the book where I say, like, the pain is not out to destroy our lives, right? Our wounds are not here, like rubbing their hands together cynically, like, how can I screw up everything in your life, right? It's tugging at us because it wants acknowledgement, right? When we just turn our head away from it and try to go in the whatever direction we're headed, and we don't address what has been deeply disruptive and hurtful and harmful or traumatizing for us, right? It keeps pulling. That's why we find ourselves in patterns over and over and over again, right? It is our system, our internal system is so clever. It is so brilliant because it will turn you back time and time again. It will keep trying to bring you back into contact with the thing that needs to be healed. And what this book does is hold you as you turn carefully and gently and begin to acknowledge and name and identify what the wounds are. I walk you through an origin healing practice. We have to acknowledge, witness the pain. We have to grieve. I say, when in doubt, breathe more. When stuck, breathe more. Grieving is movement, right? It's so necessary. And our society likes to reserve grief for death. And we also don't love to spend a lot of time there. Right? But grief is something that is so a part of our lives. And when we don't know how to be with it, right, then we ignore or avoid our pain. And I believe that we have to witness and grieve before we can actually make the long-lasting, integrated changes that we want to see for our lives and our relationships.
I would be very curious to talk about grief, but I had promised the actual question, actually, and there are
Okay.
3 questions that came in. So after my actual question, I'll turn to Q&A. So the actual question was, you mentioned that there are 5 origin wounds. Can you walk us through these 5 wounds? Because I think that would be very, very interesting and helpful. Yeah. Of
course. Yeah. So briefly, I already touched on the worthiness wound, but quick wrap up on it, right, is where there's a big condition that's attached to the worthiness wound. So the sensation of not feeling good enough, not feeling deserving, right? Not feeling good enough in that environment. And it's often kids who were performers, perfectionists, people pleasers, peacekeepers, the comic relief, right? Like, who do I need to be to get that love and connection and attention, right? The belonging
Can I interrupt for a short moment?
Yeah.
Imposter syndrome, is it just very similar sounding, or does it have any connection to that wound?
Well, I think imposter syndrome it develops later, right? I don't think children are in that space yet where they even can understand. Like, I think there's a point where it starts to come in, but when we're tiny, I don't think we go there. But yes, right, when we're adults right? I feel like so many adults feel that sense of imposter syndrome, and there's so much comparison in there, right? Is I'm not as good, or I don't deserve to be here, or if I just knew this better, or if I could just whatever. And yes, it's very much tied to worthiness. So I think it develops out of there, but I don't know if, a 5-year-old would necessarily recognize it.
Who am I to be here?
Right. Who am I? Right. They're just moving through life,
I don't deserve to be in this family.
Right. But it's, what's interesting is that actually brings us into the belonging wound, right? Okay. Because the belonging wound is, how some families are like, this is what it means to be a part of this family, right? Right. Anybody, right? Like, movies. Yeah, right. Not us. This is what we believe, right? This is what we do, right? There's a sense of the we, and listen, again, the beautiful light side of that, family traditions, things that are lovely, right? But then there's also a dark side of that, right? If you don't think act, do, have the belief system, hold the belief system that we do, you're out. You're on the outside. If you don't love who we tell you you need to love, if you don't behave this way, right, you become the black sheep. So oftentimes, right, the black sheep, the person who just doesn't feel like they fit in. Fitting in and belonging, what we learn is obviously very different, but in those early stages, right, like kids just want to fit in. Right? They just want to be a part of something. And this is where I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate, right? He says so attachment and authenticity are our two lifelines as kiddos, right? Want to know that it's okay to be ourselves and still be loved. And then we need attachment for survival. When attachment is threatened, he says, right? Children will trade authenticity in a heartbeat. They have to. Right. And so it's in that space, right, where we're like, okay, I needed to trade my authenticity to survive. I needed to trade my authenticity to be close to you. Who do you need me to be, right? In order to, how do I have to believe, right? I will do what the family does so that I can be a part of it. And again, a little bit later, children might take a path of rebellion. Right. So where they're like, I don't believe this, or I'm going to do the exact opposite of what you want me to do. Still, the path of opposition is still unintegrated, right? So we have to get to integration, but right, to grow up in a family system that's very controlling. And if you differ from them in any way, right, then there are consequences to that, which often means putting you on the outside. The third is the prioritization wound. Very simply put, you didn't feel important enough in your family growing up. And this, maybe a parent who is a workaholic, or maybe there's other addiction that's in the household, a mental health challenge that takes up a lot of space. So sometimes, you might have depression or, like a depression that just takes up all of the energy, or a sibling who has an illness and so much of the attention is there. But it also, I want to put this in here, not all wounds come from these malintended, negligent, abusive places. I talk about one client in the book, Andre, who has a single mom working multiple jobs. He loved and respected his mother so much. And he could rationalize that her working all these jobs, double shifts, was her way of prioritizing him and giving him the life that she wanted him to have. And he knew that was true. And what we came to name was that he still wanted to be a priority in her life through time spent with her. They would go to church on Sundays and then have brunch afterwards, and that was it. Otherwise, she was always working. And it was a beautiful thing to name that, because it opened up to making space to honor the pain without having to say mom was a bad mom or mom wasn't doing enough. Like, those are two totally separate experiences, right? And that's the beauty, is like, sometimes when we're very protective of people, it takes us away from honoring and naming what it is that we wanted most as a child and didn't get. That question is a profound, important question for all of you too, right? That what did I want most as a child and not get? What did I need, desire most as a child and not get? And to make space for that, to find a way to make space for that, really helps move us in a very helpful direction. So I just want to say, right, like, here was an example of someone who had a prioritization wound, even though mom was doing absolutely everything in her power.
So
right?
I actually want to ask on the tail of that example of Andre, considering his mom actually did dedicate some time to him regularly. I can't imagine, some people do have objectively reasons why they can't spend time at home. Is there a proper way to do it without wounding a child?
You can't affect the way that somebody else is going to experience something, right? Because even if she had sat down with Andre and said, you are a priority, he knew it. He knew it up here, right? But here, right, the felt experience, right? The experience of, I still want more time with my mom. That's just the reality of it. Right. And so he didn't hate his mom. In fact, he tried to protect her so much. And so directly to your question, we can't control the experience that another will have.
Mm-hmm.
As much as we want to, right? As much as we might attempt to, we can't control it. And, we can have open dialogue with children depending on age and, what's appropriate. But at the end of the day, it's like we still have to honor how a person internalizes something, even if we don't want them to internalize it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's a very wonderful answer. We did had 3 origin wounds, I believe, right?
We've done 3 so far. Yeah. Trust and safety.
Priority, and the first one, which
Worthiness. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the 4th is the trust wound. So this is when you grow up and there is a betrayal, maybe deceit, maybe lies, but there's a rupture there in the trust. And, the big ones that are very common that we know are infidelity or an affair, maybe a parent who, gambles away an education fund or something like that. I don't know if this is shocking to people or not, but for example, parents taking out credit cards in a child's name, but also on the smaller scale of things, right, where it might just be somebody who is making a promise and not following through on their word repeatedly. Again, doesn't mean we don't have the human experiences where things have to shift and plans have to change, but when there is a consistent kind of regular basis of you can't trust my word, right, then that can be deeply impactful. And then the other piece is like, sometimes we just hear the explicit narrative, like, don't trust anybody, or, all men will XYZ, or all women will XYZ, or, don't trust anybody you don't know. They're all out to take your money, or, just these storylines, right, that people are given that are imprinted in them. And then they go about life with walls high up and, eyes wide open. And, we know that obviously once trust is ruptured, it's so hard, right, to bring it back, because that hypervigilance and always expecting, the second shoe to drop or someone to betray you or lie to you, it's the little birdie, right, just chirping back there, reminding you, keep your eyes open, make sure this, make sure that, right? So that can come along with us in really big ways. And then the final wound is the safety wound. And this is a very, very, very tender wound. I make that very clear in the book. When we're talking about the absence of safety, we're also often talking about the presence of abuse. And unfortunately, we can't just skirt by that. And so we look at, emotional, physical, sexual, psychological abuse, negligence, recklessness, but it's the sensation that as a kid, you didn't feel like your well-being, your overall well-being was cared for, centered, honored, and respected, right? That you didn't feel safe and secure in the world with the adults around you.
Wow, that was an interesting journey. And logically, I should ask what to do with your discoveries, but I had promised to read the question, so I'll bring up the question.
All right, let's see.
I haven't, okay.
Okay.
Question which has more to do with mind value, customer support. I'm sorry, I cannot help you with customer support, but will your book be on Audible? Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, it is right now. And I read it and I loved reading it. It was way more fun than I thought it would be. I thought it would be quite stressful, but I loved reading my book, and it's available as of yesterday. So I hope that you enjoy it. And then Robert asked a question.
Yes, I can read it out so that it's back and forth for you.
Okay, go ahead.
So Robert's question is how to improve communication with parental figures. I've heard we need to simply meet our parents where they are and not try to change them once we are adults. But what if they continue patterns that are tension points and cause frustration in your relationship, and they don't listen to your requests to change so you can heal this part of the relationship to improve it? That was a question. Example, mothers that love to default to nagging and complaining. Thank you, Robert. That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. And I think so many people can probably relate to this. I think it's one of the most common experiences of we want so badly for, a mother, a parent, whomever, right, to acknowledge, right, to see it, to, instead of us always having to meet them where they're at, right, it's like, well, how about you meet me where I'm at? It's like, and this is, I want you to tend to this part because, it feels so meaningful to have that person, acknowledge, take ownership, responsibility, like I was saying before. There is, I think, what you've heard, there's parts of that are absolutely valid, right? It's like, we cannot change them, right? And I think hope is a very interesting one. Like, hope is so beautiful. It opens things for us, but then there's a point where hope keeps us in suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I wanted to have a rant about hope, like about half a year ago, how it's actually a slippery slope.
Yeah, right. That like sometimes hope keeps us in the cycle of, if I can just get you, because Robert, I understand that I've been there before, right? If I just say it this way, or what if I write it this way? What if I am super kind and I take this avenue? What if I just yell it at you? Like, in what way will you receive what it is that I want you to hear? And when we struggle with accepting that limitation, that constraint, that they are not changing, right? And we have to live in this moment right now, right? Not the like, well, but what if in 20 years? No, here, right now only. They're not changing right now, right? To be in that is what allows us to shift a bit of this. As I said before about the origin healing practice, witnessing is important. But I think one of the gifts is in that shift from, I don't need the person who participated in the creation of the wound to participate in the healing of it. Thank goodness we don't need that. Thank goodness that's not required, right? But I do need to be witnessed. And so, Robert, what I would say is that I'm taking a bit of a roundabout approach here, is that you do need to be witnessed, okay? But it's likely not going to come from the person that you really want it to be, right? And, when a parent continues to engage, okay, in this case, nagging and complaining, and you still want to have a relationship with that person, because there's not that many people who want to cut off or be estranged. They're like, no, like I can't stand this part, but they're still my family. I still want to be in a relationship. It's, what do you need to do when that nagging and complaining presents itself? Where do you go? How do you tend to yourself? How do you witness yourself in that moment? If you are partnered, can a partner support in the witnessing? But I think it's about when those moments present, instead of picking up the pattern, I talk about putting down the pattern, right? Because it's this little hook that's like, I'm going to complain and nag about you, Robert. And you're like, okay. And we get hooked in to this loop that starts to play out probably in the same way that it does all the time, right? And that's the shift, is I will not get hooked into this. It doesn't mean that you accept the nagging, that you're like, all right, I guess this is going to be what it's going to be, right? It's that you put down your part of the pattern, and you tend to yourself, or with a friend, or with a partner, or a therapist, and you keep tending to that part if they can't go there. You can try to set a boundary. We know that not everybody respects boundaries, and so the nagging, complaining might continue. But maybe instead of engaging, you leave. You go outside, you go somewhere else, like you move away from it, and then you take a moment to witness yourself instead of trying to do everything in your power to get this other person to witness you. It's layered. There's complications to it, of course, but I think it's probably the best way that I can. Yes, for sure. Easier said than done, 100%. But I think it's the best way I can answer it quickly right now. But I feel for you, truly. Like, I think so many of us have had that experience, or have that experience currently, but that's the practice. Easier said than done, yes, but this is about strengthening our muscles. The more that we practice it over and over and over again, the more we can try to be aware in those moments and move away. It's not 100%. Believe me, I get yanked back in there from time to time. And I'm like, oh, I picked up the pattern, but it's still something to work on.
Mm-hmm. I actually wanted to add that it's easier done when practiced. So
yeah, exactly.
But there is another, Robert. First of all, thanks a lot for this question. I think it's very relevant to a lot of people who have people in their life. And
it's relevant if you have family, right? I love it. So, but people are like, who should read your book? And I'm like, anybody with a family, like, period.
Yeah, and then there's a question from Marima regarding trust. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's a question, thank God. Regarding trust, what empower questions should I ask? Because husband is the type of person that does not trust anybody, and he expresses it constantly.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. And yeah, I think so. Instead of just trying to get people to trust, right, or just trying to get somebody to do anything, I love the constraint question, right, which is what keeps you from trusting, right? So instead of just existing in this conversation of, well, all right, my husband doesn't trust anybody and he expresses it all the time, right? There's an inquiry about, okay, well, what keeps you from trusting people? And what do you believe will happen, right? Like, what's the fear here, right? To learn. And I think, this work, I work with so many couples. Obviously, this book is about understanding the origins of you, but it's also about understanding the origins of the people you love, right? And I assume that for you, Marima, is your husband as well. And to understand the origins of the rupture of trust. Why not? Where did it come from? What betrayals, deceits, lies did your husband experience, right? And to really connect to that, to see, because the holding that position, right, is a form of protection, right? When people have a rupture in trust, when it comes to boundaries, you probably have heard, therapists talk about this, like you either have porous boundaries where everything gets in and out, or you have the high, rigid, the walls are up. And when people put walls up, right, it's their attempt at protecting themselves from ever being hurt, right? From ever being lied to, from ever having, getting so close to someone and then having them deceive or lie to them or betray them in some way. And I would want to really understand what your husband's story is with this and really connect to it, because when you put the wall up high, you may successfully protect yourself from having betrayals like that happen. But what also happens is you block intimacy, you block connection, you block closeness, right? And that's what I'm saying. That's the whole point of this book, is that, sure, we have protective mechanisms. We have things that can attempt to keep us from the loss of worthiness, belonging, prioritization, safety, and trust. But it also has an alternative consequence. And that alternative consequence is going to get in the way of relationships and life being the way that you want it to be. Right. And so, I think some of those questions, Marima, about understanding the origins of the trust wound here, and then what keeps him from, and what he believes will happen if he lowers that wall and actually starts to trust. Where did he learn it from? Right? Because maybe something didn't happen directly to him, but maybe he saw a betrayal happen with a parent or an adult in his life that annihilated them, right? Where it's like, okay, mom, there was an affair in the family, and then I saw mom on the bathroom floor for a decade, and I saw that it destroyed her, right? And now that is imprinted within me, and it keeps me, I will never get super close to anybody because I never want that to happen. Right. So it's like, okay, experience and observation. How does that affect you? How did that lead you and guide you, in your life? And can we get curious about this together?
I do have a question before I ask the next question from Q&A, and then the next one will be the last one.
Okay.
Time for that. But no, I'm not asking that question. I have my own question. Having been in this industry for a long time, I know that there's a huge desire to change people around you, especially people that you love. Very often that desire comes from well-meaning attempts to make them better. But you said also a few phrases to the same effect. One was that you can't control other people's experiences or how they react. And the other one was also that, you can't really change, when you were talking about mother. So how do you resist that urge and desire to inflict your wisdom on the people around you? Part of the reasons why in our industry it's on steroids is because we open the door and we see the light, and then we want to share that light with everyone.
Sure, of course, right? It's like when you live it and you experience it, and you're like, wow, look at the changes that have happened in my life, or, I have such a different perspective. Of course you want the people you love to experience that too. But control is an illusion of safety, right? It's like, if I can just get you to see this too, then what? right? Then our relationship can be better. Then I don't have to leave you. Then, it's like, there's this desire, right, to force it. And what I say is that just live it, embody it, share about it, right? It's like, you can bring a horse to the well, but you can't make it drink, right? It's like, if you want to send the book, if you want to send a podcast, if you want to say, read this article, sure, you can put that in people's tables, of course, but there is something about not needing to control another person's journey. However it is, they may or may not get there. And it is hard when we love somebody, of course, we don't want people to be in suffering. Right. And it can be very, very challenging to just hold and allow someone to be on the journey that they're on without trying to shift it for them. People need to do it themselves. We can be inspired by other people, right? And that's why I said, live it, embody it. Right? Because if you're having a conversation with somebody who's not doing the same work that you're doing, but you're like, I just had this conversation, or I just read this book, and oh my gosh, I didn't realize this thing, and now it's opened. I've had an aha moment, and I can't believe I've never made that connection before. Beautiful. Maybe that is an invitation for them, but people have to come to it themselves, right? Because otherwise we rob them of their journey. And so it's a hard one for sure, but I think the best approach is to live it, embody it, put the things in front. If they want to read, listen, beautiful, but be the messenger, without needing to control or force, even if you believe that it's the better outcome, that it would lead to the better outcome.
Well, if you want them to read that book a really long flight and accidentally unplug their devices before the flight so that they aren't charged, and then maybe they'll read the book.
Right.
But I just know from personal experience, Vishen was into personal growth way before me, so he insisted on me reading a few books, which I refused point blank. So I remember when he introduced me to John Gray, his introduction was, "This is my wife. She refused to read your book." So
you're like.
No, I was laughing. I actually had a little advantage because we had a chat with him before Vishen joined, so it was okay.
Okay.
But here's the question, and that will be the last one because I have to be very mindful of time, and I'm not being mindful of time. But question comes from Rebecca, and it's, what if your adopted children come and add to the wounds you had before? Now teens, almost 18, it's hard to know where the wounds came from. My husband has issues. I married someone I should not have, likely due to my own severe abuse. Mom was the abusive one. She has died. It was almost a relief.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing all of that, Rebecca. And yeah, I think it's very common, right, that when an abuser dies, there can be a lot of relief there for us. And so, yeah, just acknowledge that for you. I'm not sure if you're asking like that, if you've adopted children, that they are contributing to your wounds or how you're contributing to theirs. They're now teens, almost 18, and it's hard to know where the wounds came from. Maybe don't worry so much about where it comes from, and to just still name what they are. And again, whether you're asking about contributing to the adopted children's wounds or how that's contributing to your own, either which way, to address and connect to what the wounds are and not spend so much time, excuse me, necessarily needing to fully understand, well, it came from here, it came from there. And this is a really good segue into, because sometimes people are like, well, I don't remember stuff from childhood, right? That's okay too. Just the last time you felt it, right? The last time you experienced, you can work your way back, right? And again, our systems are protective. We know that, such brilliant systems. And so if we can't remember, there's a reason for that. So we're not trying to push it. We don't have to always understand, okay, did it come from here or here or here or here? But just begin by addressing and naming what those wounds are as the start point. But thank you. And it sounds like there's lots of tender layers in in this question?
Well, I'm actually wondering, I've never come across that thing, but I think that kind of feeling in the middle of the interview, but I was wondering, maybe we should make like a workshops but I would need Bianca with me, because I think it would be maybe interesting for some people to come on and work with some of the wounds. Unfortunately, we have to finish. So I'm going to ask the last question of Vienna in a moment.
Okay.
Yes, please. Of course, yes, please. I know. I have the best guests on the shows in Mind Valley. I know it. So, but thank you. Thank you for saying yes, please. Traditionally, I want to ask people who are with us right now here to leave a heart for my wonderful cats. I'll ask a question, don't worry.
Thank you.
And the people who are going to be watching in recording later, and that's a lot of people, leave your heart in the comments below the video, wherever you're going to see that. So we, I love it.
Such a good group.
with my guests. So, but a question for Vienna. Can you show the book? I know I can see it behind you, and talk about it a little bit. Like where?
Course.
Yes.
Well, and thank you for giving me the opportunity too. It's a funny, somebody's like, you're an author. And I'm like, no, you're an author. And so I have to embody that identity. I'm very excited. The Origins of You, How Breaking Family Patterns Can Liberate the Way We Live and Love, came out yesterday. So you can order your copy, get it in your ears on Audible, whichever preferred way of absorbing information. But this is my life's work. And I know that not everybody is going to spend years, decades in therapy, and to be able to read this in the comfort of your own home, right? I wanted to create something that has been so impactful for me personally, and with all of the clients that I've ever worked with, and to begin to explore and really connect to our family of origin, our family systems, to really honor what happened there, so that is we don't need to live in patterns, in the unwanted patterns that we have in our lives, right? But to be able to actually know how to turn towards our pain in a way that's going to move us forward is, what this is all about. And so I am excited already people are reading it, which is amazing, but excited for more people to read it. And I think it's, I wrote it for you to read it as the adult child first, but you will also read it as a partner, as a parent, as a friend, right? It's like, even if a wound isn't resonant with you, it might be for your partner, or it might be for your child. And that's the beauty of this, is to remember, at the end, I talk about this exercise that psychotherapist Michael Kerr offers, which is to think of your mother as your grandmother's daughter and see what shifts then. And there's beauty in being able to think of everybody that way, right? And again, not excuses, but to just remember that we were all once tiny little humans, right? Who were existing in systems that were flawed systems. And there's a lot that happened there. And so, okay, how does that open things up as we move through this? So yes, thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's been lovely chatting with you all. Your community is incredible. And I hope you'll get the book. And please follow me on Instagram at MindfulMFT. And would love to come back and get to chat with people who have some of these wounds.
If we do that, I hope Bianca will be with us so that she can bring people up. Meanwhile, you can leave the handle to your Instagram maybe on the chat.
Yes.
I am going to ask Parental to that. I hope you can multitask. Is that your first book?
This is my first book.
Okay, so I wish you all the luck. I know you've sent me the book, but I'm going to go on Amazon and buy it, because I think that's the best support you can do to actually get that book, even if you have access to it. Still get it.
Thank you so much.
It matters a lot. So wish you all the luck with that book. And
thank you.
Thank you for joining us. It was a wonderful conversation. And thank you everyone who was here. And I'll see you in a while.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.